Good morning. Good to see so many happy, smiley faces this morning. A little pick-me-up, a little Blues Travelers, and a little, what was it? Hootie and the Blowfish before this. Good way to start the morning. All right, so welcome and thank you for attending my session, Configuration Manager 2012 and PowerShell. Better together disappeared from the slide, but they truly are better together, and hopefully today you'll see that. So before we get started with that, just a couple things I want to point out. We are going to do a lot of demo, so number one, pray to the demo gods with me. Number two, if you're in the back, your eyes are going to hurt. If you're in the front, you might get motion sickness. So just keep that in mind. You may want to come up a little bit if you're in the back. We got the font as big as we could, but you may have to squint if you're in the back. All right, a couple questions just to get before we get started to understand where everybody's at. Who uses Configuration Manager 2007 today? Okay, great. Who uses VB Script with Configuration Manager 2007? Wonderful. Who uses PowerShell with Configuration Manager 2007? All right, good to see. Last question. How many people can confidently say they can hum the themes of Phantom of the Opera? Yes. If you're in this hotel, you might get that. If not, I'm sorry. The elevators are full of it. All right, so let's get started. So we're going to talk a little bit about site management, a little bit about client management, as well as some PowerShell things that, scripts and things that you can run to prepare for Configuration Manager 2012. There's definitely some gotchas, some things that in your 2007 environment, maybe you can clean those up before you move to 2012. I've been fortunate with my company. We've been in the early adopter program, so we've been on the bleeding edge of Config Manager 2012 for the last 2 years. We actually have it implemented in production right now, 8,000 seats. So we're running pretty well. Things are doing pretty good right now. Always test all scripts. Don't blame me, okay? All the scripts that I'm going to show you today, I will make them available. Basically, you'll see I've got some text files that kind of make it easier to run the scripts. I'll make those available on my blog, so if you want to download those and run with those, you're more than welcome. Safety first, remember that. Okay, why PowerShell? I saw enough hands, hopefully enough of you know why PowerShell. It really is easy to learn. I've had a few people tell me it's like programming, it's like developers, blah, blah, blah. And there is a heavy end to it, but there's definitely a lot more that's intuitive with it than VB Script. If you've done VB Script forever, that's obviously comfortable to you. I challenge you to spend a little bit of time with PowerShell, work through the examples that I'll give you, and then see what you think about PowerShell. Object-based is huge, right? And you'll see when we go through some of the demos, you know, once from the command line, I can grab a hold of an object and I can manipulate it, change it, query it, show more information on it, all that magic. And of course, Configuration Manager in PowerShell. If you can't spell WMI yet, I wrote it up there 3 times just for you. But that is the base of all this right now. There is no Configuration Manager provider to PowerShell yet. So right now, we're going to be hitting everything through WMI. And we're going to talk a little bit about building functions and commandlets. I'm going to show you some functions that I build out that will hopefully inspire you to build some of your own to take your PowerShell to the next level. In the tools, you've got PowerShell. Config Manager 2007, I put it up there because that SDK is pretty complete. The 2012 SDK, actually, if you go out to Microsoft now and look in the Microsoft Docs, you will find the 2012 pre-release SDK available. It's not yet available for download, but it is available on the site. Yes, and I made a nice little tiny URL /CM 2012 SDK to make it a little easier to get to that Microsoft site. And I always like to talk about the WMI Sim Studio. I'll bring it up and just show it to you briefly. Probably a lot of you are familiar with WebMTest. I use that, but I also use Sim Studio as well, so I just want to make sure you're aware of that. All right, demo. We're going to jump right in. We're going to do a little bit. Forgive me for this first demo. We are going to do some basics of WMI with PowerShell just to baseline so people are familiar with that, and then we're going to step into more Configuration Manager demos. Okay, great. That's my Configuration Manager console. Let me flip over here to my PowerShell. Like I said, my apologies. Hopefully you can see that in the back. So I have a handy script. It's called Start Demo. It's available, I think, on poshcode.org. Basically, it it allows me to not have to type every single thing in, because we wouldn't get nearly as far if I had to type everything in, believe me. So basically I have text files that have the commands in them. So you'll kind of see how this works. I'll try not to go too fast, hopefully not too slow as well. So that white text is the actual commands I'm calling. Everything else is a comment or something around it. So this is just very basic, get-wmi object, win32_computer system. That's a WMI that's in WMI on every computer that is Microsoft right now. Basically, when you run this command, you're going to get some basic information back about the computer. Very simple to do, very handy. You see I added a pipe command and I put a select star on the end of it because there are actually some additional properties that are under Win32 computer system. They're just hidden by default when you run those commands from PowerShell. So I just wanted to mention that. You'll see as we get into more of the configuration manager how that can be beneficial. All right, so we're just kind of stepping through the pipe. Make sure you guys can understand the pipe. You can see I added a get-member onto the end of it. And this is one of the ways we'll be exploring information in Configuration Manager. I'm going to scroll up a little bit. You'll see there's some methods you can call, and then there's a bunch of properties. Over on the right-hand side, you can see a little more information. Once we get into the Configuration Manager, I'll show you how to kind of space that out to actually be able to read that information a little bit better. This is one of the things I really enjoy about the command line in PowerShell, right? You see this line at the bottom. Basically, I took that same line that I was calling, get WMI, that's an alias, GWMI, that's for get WMI object. Basically put it in parentheses and put a .name on the end. If you only have one instance of an item in that class, you can run that and you'll actually get the information back. So I got the computer name pretty easily just with a simple PowerShell command. I do want to mention though, because you'll see this when we're enumerating packages and other things, such information like processes, you can't do that same quick thing with a process because there's more than one instance. So you actually have to do a select object or something like that to display more information. You can see it all kind of run off the screen, but basically this is just showing process and path. We're almost done with the 101, I promise. All right, so you can see here, get WMI, Win32 process. I'm telling it to only show the process name and the working set size, and then I'm telling it to sort it in descending order. No real magic here, but not a lot of effort required to make it happen either. That's the point. One more here. You can see I added a where object in the middle, and where I say the working set size is greater than whatever that number is right there. So it allows me to quickly filter out the data that I want to see, which is very, very important when we get into Configuration Manager. And you can see here I got a question mark for the where object. I try to spell most of the commands out that I use, but sometimes you get into these real quick ways to write code, very handy. And one other thing to mention here, filter is another handy command. Basically, when you use filter, you're grabbing the instance specific to that. So instead of the get WMI object by default, it's kind of like doing a SQL or WQL query. So the best example is whenever you're actually talking Configuration Manager and you're talking, the all systems collection, for example. If you only want one item back from there, if you do a select star against all systems, that's a longer query than if you use a filter command. So I just wanted to mention that here so you're aware. Basically, it's just a quick filter. Okay, that's the end of demo 1. So now let's actually do some config manager stuff. We're going to start with some site information. And you can see here, we're going to the SMS_site and subsites. And you can see we're mentioning a namespace, root SMS site underscore, and then those last 3 letters is your actual site code. So if you're not familiar with using this in PowerShell, this is that namespace is standard for your primary sites, simple sites. And get the SMS_site subsites is one of the classes that's in Configuration Manager 2012. I only have one site here, so it's not too exciting, but you can actually see I get some information back from the actual the site server. One thing I should mention here, all of these queries are based on your rights inside of Configuration Manager. So You know, if you're in roles-based administration and you may not have rights to see sites or collections or things like that, you'll be limited just like you're on the console, which is a great thing. Just keep that in mind. Another handy thing that we'll be able to do here with PowerShell, you can see the end of that command. I added an out-grid view to the end of it. And when we actually look at packages or something like that, it'll look a little more interesting, but you can see quickly, we can get into a grid where we can actually filter and do other things. So, you know, if you're just trying to do a one-off and need to find some information, it's pretty easy once you're familiar with PowerShell and Configuration Manager to get out there and grab some information. This is another handy one. It's new in Configuration Manager 2012. Software update point status. If you ever had to look at the synchronization status in Configuration Manager 2007, you actually had to go look in logs, or you had to go look at each primary site or wherever the software update point was, or you could look in the WSUS admin console if you wanted to maybe find that information. You will find the same information in the Configuration Manager console, but if you wanted to actually run some workflow around it or something like that, you could run this type of command from here. I haven't mentioned how to run this command remotely, but I'll do that here in a little bit. Basically, you don't have to be setting on the site server to run these commands. So you can see I got some information back. All this information will be defined in the SDK as far as what each thing means. You do see I had a last sync error code of 0, so I should be happy. There are some other information, the last time it actually pulled information down versus the last time it actually did a sync. But it's great. That information is handy right there for you. You can even see the WSUS server right there from your command. I just wanted to throw this in to show you, by default, when you're running WMI queries, there's a convert to date time that's part of WMI and PowerShell. So anytime you're running WMI queries, you can run this convert to date time to actually take those WMI date times and actually convert them into more friendly times. You can see that information there. We just output it to the screen. Date's a little more friendly. All right, so a little bit more fun now. And I'll have to look. We'll see when we get back to the PowerPoint. I'll talk through these a little bit slower because some of this might be in the PowerPoint. We'll just breeze past that a little faster. All right, so we're going to create a new boundary in Configuration Manager 2012. Boundaries in 2012 are different than 2007. In 2012, you discover Active Directory sites. You can create your own boundaries as well. You know, boundary groups. You create boundaries, and they can be IP ranges, IP subnets, AD sites. Once you have a boundary, then you have to add it to a boundary group, and that is actually how you determine site assignment, content location, things like that. So we're going to do two steps here. First, we're going to create a boundary, and then we're going to discover through PowerShell how we can actually add those boundaries to a boundary group. All right, so you can see my command line. Apologies because it's all on one line. Not everything in PowerShell has to be on one line, I promise. The way to run it through the demos, this works, and when you start splitting it out, basically we'd have to open up a different thing of code for each thing. So I'm just going to briefly talk through this. Set WMI instance is how we create a new instance, and we have another way as well, and I'll show you that. I'm going to create a new instance of the SMS_boundary. And you can see my namespace again. It's going to be very consistent. That's the site that I'm actually going to do it to. That's where the SMS provider is. This is what I was talking about, how you could do this from a remote system. Anything you do in WMI with PowerShell, you should have the -computer name property. And when you specify that, assuming you have the rights to connect, PowerShell will do the magic to connect to that system. So you don't have to be running this, like I said, on the site server. Then you can see my argument. It's inside of an array, so I have a boundary type of 1. That's just what specifies an Active Directory site. Got a nice display name there, and as well as the values. That's basically I'm creating a new boundary for an Active Directory site called Montpellier. All right, so we just created it. We didn't see anything on the screen because I was actually assigning it to that boundary variable. So we can actually just display that now by typing in boundary. So that's pretty slick, pretty handy. Let's flip over here just so I should have shown you so you didn't think there were smoke and mirrors going on. We actually do have a Montpellier Active Directory site now. It's there. Like I said, a boundary is great, but a boundary doesn't give you anything in software distribution and deployment. You actually have to get it into a boundary group in Config Manager 2012. So I've got my boundary. Let's look at what properties and methods we have on a boundary. And you can see my properties there. I can see boundary flags, boundary ID, type, all that type of information. I don't see any methods, so I don't see a way here that I can add a boundary to a boundary group. So let's go a little bit further. Let's see. So I have to create a boundary group as well because I don't have a boundary group in my environment yet. So this is the process to create a boundary group. As you can see, it's very similar. Basically, we're saying it's in the SMS boundary group class. We're going to create a new instance there. I'm going to call the boundary group Europe with a very descriptive description of all Europe. Pretty quick, pretty simple. And again, I just wanted to display it to the screen, so that's why I just typed in $boundary group. You can see my boundary group information now. And you also notice you have a member count and you have a site system count. Let me go over in the console just so you can see how that corresponds. This is pretty handy when you start actually building out in Configuration Manager. You can tell if a boundary group is being used or not. Same thing for boundaries. When you look at boundaries, you can see if they're a member of a group or not. So that information is right there, but we also have that within the property here that we're seeing in PowerShell. So we've got a boundary and we have a boundary group. Now we got to get that boundary in the boundary group. Let's look at boundary group and let's look and see what members we have there. There you see the methods: add boundary, add site system, remove and remove. So that's great. That information's there. The reason why I'm stepping through this is hopefully so you can get an idea that get member is very, very, very valuable when you're dealing with PowerShell. It allows you to really get and see that information. Like I said, the SDK, the pre-release has just been released, so a lot of this information is self-discovery right now. All right, and this is all I need to do to add a boundary to a boundary group. If I had expanded this, you would see that basically all it needs is the boundary ID. And when we created the boundary a little bit ago, let's scroll back up to our boundary. There you see. So when we created a new boundary, it automatically assigned the ID. We still have that boundary in that variable. So we're just going to say new boundary group. We're going to say add to a boundary group. And you can see there we're just specifying the boundary in the ID property. By doing that, we automatically add it. Now if we want to take a look, basically again I just put it back in the variable and then we can display it. You notice now member count is 1, so we actually have that boundary in the boundary group. Okay, so we have a boundary in a boundary group. Now we want to associate a site system with that boundary. For example, a distribution point or something like that, so that that content will be available to that boundary group. We can do that here from the command line as well. So basically, I'm kind of filtering the properties and methods for this boundary group. You can see I added a where clause where I said the name is like, add with an asterisk on it. So it's only going to show me those. FL is to format it in a list so I can actually see the properties. So you can see I have two methods here. One's add boundary, one is add site system. And then you can see a little more of the information as what's required to do that. And you can see here for adding site system, it's this magical thing called a server now path. And I want to show you how to get that because that, when you start using PowerShell with Configuration Manager, you may find you need that on a frequent basis. And then there's the flags property, and I had to basically create one myself to see what that flag was because, like I said, the SDK isn't available yet. Okay, so we need to get the server now path. That's the network abstraction layer path. And you'll see it's just a string, and it makes sense when you see it, but it's not something you want to create yourself because there's some special characters and things involved with it. So basically, I'm querying the Configuration Manager site for the resources to find anything that has a role of SMS site system. Once I have that, then I'll display it. Since I only have one site, that's obviously all you're going to see here. You do see something called now path. Like I said, this is very important when you're adding to distribution points and doing other things that are site related. You'll find you're often coming back to try to find that now path. And this is the command that I need to run to add that site system to that boundary group. Pretty simple, fairly painless. Let's go over and do a couple PowerPoints. Yeah, I probably should have done part of this before we did that. But we'll talk through this just very briefly. You can see here, I added a kind of a textual highlight. That LAB is your site server, your site code, and then the computer name if you want to remotely hit your server. This is just an example of getting a classic package. This works in 2007 or 2012. So we talked a little bit about new WMI instance. I also want to show you this method to create a new instance because some things don't always work with the new WMI instance. I will point out, though, there is one big difference between the two, and maybe some of the PowerShell gurus will have better information for me. You can see this WMI class in brackets. This is an accelerator to get into WMI a little faster, and you can see I just have a long namespace path to the class to get that information. I can't pass credentials this way. If you're used to using PowerShell with getWMI and new WMI instance, things like that, you can actually use the getCredential property to get credentials, and you can pass that along with it so that you don't have to be logged in with the user that you want to perform those actions. Unfortunately, with this method, you have to, as far as I know. But like I said, this is another way that you can create those instances. So you can see basically, I have this new package I call create instance. That's a standard WMI call. And then I've added a name, a source flag, and a path. And you see the very last step is a .put. So anytime you do a create instance or anytime you modify an existing instance, you have to use a .put on the end of it to actually save that information back to Configuration Manager or to WMI as it is. So the previous slide was showing how to create the package. This is an example of how to create the program for that package. Again, we're creating an instance. We're getting the package ID from that package that we just created, and we're setting that because you have to associate a package with a program. And we've got to have a magical program name as well as a command line. Again, the SDK will tell you what the minimum required properties are for each item that you create. So it's definitely something you need to take a look at. And again, we're using a put on the end of it to actually save that information. All right, so we've talked about put a bit. You can see here, basically, I'm basically modifying a package at this point. I'm saying to get a package where the ID is equal to, and you see the package ID there, and then I'm changing the description. That's a pretty safe change to make, and it's good for a demonstration. So I change the description, and then again a .put to actually put that package back. Now, if you want, you can work with multiple packages. One of my favorite scripts, I've never actually been able to run it in production. It would be nice, though, if any of you see that name of that application there. There's a little humor in the presentation. Okay, so basically what we're doing is we're finding anything that has JRE in the name for the package, and then we're doing a for each, and then we're looping through and deleting them. Caution, caution, very dangerous, right? I don't want you to call me and say, Greg, I actually just put an asterisk in there, and all my packages just suddenly disappeared. That's what will happen, so make sure that you're aware of what you're doing there. All right, program flags. This is one of my favorites. It's a challenge for a lot of people. I want to talk through it just a little bit here. And let's see. Basically, we're getting a hold of a program. So there are certain things in a program that are in this program flags property. It's a binary value. Basically, each position means something different. Like one is, allow user to interact with the program. One is run as administrator. Those types of things. The one that I have right here is actually disabled program. All right, so let me just hit a couple more clicks to show the rest of this information. So you got to use bitwise operators to actually set these flags. Now you'll find these in advertisement flags, package flags, program flags. Pretty much anything that says flags on the end of it, you're probably going to have to do some binary magic. And in the demo, we'll show this a little bit better than what you see here. But basically, when you want to enable a flag, you use a binary OR. That's the -BOR in PowerShell. When you want to remove a flag, you use a binary XOR. When you just want to check it in an if statement, that's when you use the binary AND. And you'll see some examples as we go through this. I did want to mention deployments and collections here for a minute. As you can see, all these are very standard. I mean, you can see most of what you're typing on these lines is just about the same, right? You're just changing the class that you're querying. So once you get familiar with that, it's pretty simple. All right, so configure manager site management demo. That's what I already showed you, so we're actually going to step past this demo. Okay, now actually we'll add the demo for packages. I must be missing a slide there. So let me see, we're going to talk through packages. Now one may ask, Greg, this is Configure Manager 2012, why are we talking about packages? Well, I'll tell you simply, applications are very hard to figure out how to do this without an SDK. So in the next few months, few weeks, hopefully, you'll see more information and we'll start blogging about that. I worked through some processes to try to do it, and there's some definite learning curves required around it. There are a few examples out there, and it's just going to take a little bit of time to get there. So we'll talk packages for today. Let's see. One thing I didn't show you yet, I'll flip over here real quick. The WMI Sim Studio, I'll just mention that while we're here. It's actually a web interface. It allows you to get in, and you can see here I'm actually connected to a client, but I can connect back to root. Oh, sorry, thanks. I got to click the button. Okay, so inside of WMI Sim Studio, I can actually get in and I can actually look at all those classes and actually even dive into them to look at the instances, find methods, all that magical information. So for example, I can click find and look for boundary. And by the way, if I know a property name, or I think I know a property name, I can search for that as well. But you can see SMS boundary. You can see the properties here. I can click here and show instances. So that's great. I can actually see I have 2 boundaries. And let's see, I always have trouble going back. Okay. And you can see the properties there as well. If there were methods associated, you'd see those there also. So it's kind of helpful for discovery to find that information. It's just something to keep in your handy toolkit. It's called WMI Tools. Actually, WMI Sim Studio. I have a hidden slide in here that tells you how to find it. It's a little bit older tool from Microsoft. If you look for WMI Tools and you search on Microsoft, you'll find it there. But I have a link in the hidden slides, so make sure you download the slides. All right, so we're going to talk through packages and programs a little bit. A couple of these we've talked about in detail already, so I'm going to breeze through a few of them. We're going to slow down a little bit when we start talking about those binary ands and ors. So first, let's take a look at just packages. All right, I want to see what packages I have in my environment. So now I've got packages inside of a variable. I only want to show the first 10. It's a little nauseating to see that way, but I just wanted to show you there's quite a bit of data there. In fact, I can use measure object, which is part of PowerShell, to show me that information. I have 27 packages total. And if I want to make it pretty, if I want to display the count in something else, I can just put parentheses around it and put a .count on it. It'll show me that. All right, so let's look at what methods and properties are available for a package. Add distribution points, that's pretty important. Refreshing package source is another one that's handy. Those are the 2 that I find I use the most. And then, of course, you have all the properties for a package. There's package flags, which is one of those magical flags fields. Another thing you get for free with PowerShell is you can export all this stuff very quickly to just about anything, right? Export-CSV, that's built into PowerShell. So I can basically quickly export everything for all the packages that I have in my environment to a CSV file with just a couple command lines. So that's pretty handy. If I just want to see that information, I can do an alt-grid view, and I can actually get it into that magical grid again. Now this will be handy, and we'll talk about it a little bit later in more detail. But you can see all the properties here for all the packages in your environment. Last refresh time could be interesting. And I did want to mention this, and we'll see in the next step in the demo. You notice it kind of truncated. I only get so many fields in this what I get here for free. So let me filter that grid view a little bit and only show me what I care about. Where I'm getting to is this magical package source path. In Config Manager 2012, there's a couple things with package source path that you want to be aware of. A lot of things require UNC path. I think packages, you can actually migrate them, but if you're using a migration tool to 2012, the drive letter isn't going to work for you because that's on a different server, right? So anytime you try to migrate from using a migration tool from 2012, it will see if it can resolve the path. And if it's not on C:, my source share, then it won't migrate it because it failed. So this is one of the ways you can quickly look at all your source paths to see if you need to modify those before you run any migration tools. Okay, we talked about the WMI type accelerator a bit. I did want to mention there's kind of 3 different ways we can query. 2 of them are in green, and the third one is the WMI type accelerator. So you can see, let me see if I can highlight it. This is what we have been using a bit. You can see we added the filter to this one to find a specific package ID, MM20014. Okay? If you're good with WQL, you can actually just do a dash query and actually query that way. And I'll show you in a second how that can be very handy. You notice I do still have my namespace on there. You always have to be in the right namespace, but my class is just part of the WQL query. And then, like I was talking about, the WMI type accelerator. Let me flip over real quick because it's just one of the ways that I find information when I'm looking, and I'll just mention that while we're here. I need to get to my logs directory for my configuration manager environment. SMSprovider.log is very helpful when you're trying to discover what's happening under the covers. Just as an example, if I go into my console and I go to boundary groups, right? I just clicked on boundary groups. If I go back over here, I'll find it actually ran the WQL select star from SMS boundary group to display that information. Where this gets really handy is when you start creating those filters, like for software updates and things like that, you get that complex WQL query. You can take it right out of here and put it into that PowerShell query command. I don't actually have the example here, but my colleague Chad and I worked on in an environment where the software update point couldn't directly go to Microsoft to download content, but we got the query out of Configuration Manager to know what we needed to download, and then we could run that off of a different system to download those specific update files as Configuration Manager required. So just by seeing that query, it's worth its weight in gold. All right, so quickly here, we just basically got that information to show it and display it to the screen. And we are going to walk through that process now of creating a package, so I'll step through that kind of quick. You can see here we got the few required properties. We've added those here. And then we do that set WMI instance to actually create that package. Again, you can see this is where I'm actually adding those variables. I could have just put it directly in there in quotes if I wanted to, just trying to make it a little simpler to reuse the code that's there. Okay, I kind of want to talk through the process. You created a package. We want to send it to the DPs. We'll create a program. We'll create an advertisement. Just to kind of get that end-to-end scenario. So we want to look to see if there is a method for adding distribution points, and there is, so we're going to leverage that. So what I want to look for, just to make it simpler and not have to scroll a bunch, and again, I formatted it into a list, and you can see here I've got the add distribution points. I've got that now path. This is another example of going to get that resource list, the now path. We'll display it there quickly. And then we'll add it to the DPs. Return value 0, everybody's happy. We'll quickly create a program now. We're almost to the magical program flags, I believe. So you can see there we have to have a command line and a program name. Once we have those, then we're ready to create the program. So we just run that set WMI instance again. Okay, so now we're going to actually talk about the program flags just a little bit. Now, if you look in the SDK, you'll see a little more information about which operator means what. For this one, program being disabled is actually bit number 12. So we put a little magical math operator in there to actually do that 2 to the 12. And we're doing the .band to do the binary and it didn't return any information, so that means it wasn't set. So at least we know the program's not disabled. Okay, we can do another one to see if there's any user interaction, that checkbox to allow the user to interact with the program. These things can be important, and a lot of times you wouldn't do it when you just create a new program, right? But you might query all your programs to find out where it is enabled. And this is basically the same process you would use. We just have an if statement. We do want to enable the checkbox to run with administrative rights. Now, we already have that program, right? We've been looking at it in this myNewProgram variable. We're doing that binary OR to actually set that the flag to run with administrative rights. And I want to suppress notifications. And I'll talk about this a little bit more whenever we're talking about migrating from 2007 to 2012. This is one of those things you may have to go into your environment and see about enabling. It just depends on your environment. And I wanted to mention this because sometimes you can do things from a command line that the GUI won't allow you to do. Like, for example, there are certain settings that you cannot set in the GUI, like, only run when no user's logged on, and allow to interact with the user or something like that, right? Some of those things, you have to look at the SDK and make sure that you're following what the SDK says, right? You can't have the enable user action set when you're running, let's see, with one of these. So basically, you just have to make sure that you're following what the SDK says. A lot of times it will prevent you from doing it, but especially with program flags, it's easy to set flags that aren't actually valid, or at least a combination of flags that aren't valid. And then again, we just do the put to actually save that information back. Quickly again, now we're creating the advertisement. You see we have our required properties for creating an advertisement. Collection, package ID, program name, and the actual name of the advertisement. It is actually advertisement under the covers in 2012 when you're talking classic information. And you can see here we are passing all that information again with the setWMI instance magic. Here we're checking our advertisement flags here, using the XOR to actually check those advertisement flags. Basically to see if run from DP and run from remote DP are enabled the way I want them to be. And we'll save that. Okay, I think we're ready to go talk about lazy properties next. Let me check before I flip back. Okay, let me flip over here. I'm going to talk about these, but we'll probably skip the demo in this part just because it's not a lot different from what we just did, so I don't want to suffer through that pain with you. So PSCX Configuration Manager, this is something that I've been working on. It's on CodePlex. Really still looking for feedback, and I'll mention later I have a birds of a feather tonight, things like that. Interested to see what things people really want to do with Configuration Manager and PowerShell. But I'll show you some examples here in the PowerPoint, and if we have time, we can run through some examples later. Basically, like I talked about, a lot of the things that you're doing are the same, right? 80% of your command line is exactly the same every time. Well, when PowerShell version 2 came out, you were able to create your own functions with help and everything else. So basically, I created a set of functions that kind of hide a lot of that information for connecting to the provider and all that. It's just in the background now. So for example, here you can see get CM advertisement. You pass it the server name, and it will do everything that's inside of that function there, so you don't have to. It's pretty basic, but it returns exactly what you would get if you would run the full WMI command. So it's just a little easier to deal with, and you can obviously write a lot of other things around it at that point. Now, I am going to talk about lazy properties, and you will see that I'm using the PowerShell community extensions. But the lazy properties persist either way, whether you're just using the normal get WMI object calls that we were talking about, or if you're using these. So this is another thing that really tricks people up, and it's kind of magical. So if there's one thing to remember from this session, hopefully this is it. You can see here we're doing a get CM advertisement where the advertisement ID is equal to blah, right? And then I'm showing the property for if the assigned schedule is enabled. It will always return false when you call it this way, okay? Now the way you're calling it here is very similar to doing the select statement. So if you did a select star from SMS underscore advertisement where advertisement ID equals that advertisement ID, you will always see assigned schedule enabled. If you look in the SDK, you'll see that assigned schedule enabled is classified as a lazy property. And you have to read the SDK to explain what a lazy property is in a little more detail. But basically, the cost of querying that information was so high when you're trying to run multiple queries or queries on a lot of data, they don't return that data unless you know you really want it. So it will always return false, unfortunately. So you actually have to call this a little different way to actually see that information. And this is where you actually get that instance directly. And I kind of cheat, and this is how I do it. I run that same command to begin with, and then one of the properties that come back from that is the WMI path, and that's that long path that I showed you with the WMI accelerator. When you use the WMI accelerator to that path, then you'll actually get the assigned schedule enabled back, and then you can actually, determine whether the schedule is enabled or not. So that's very important. I've worked with a lot of people that trip up on that, right? You go query your site. Well, I don't see anything as mandatory. Why is my CEO's system rebooting? Well, it's because you got to query it a different way. And lazy properties, I haven't seen them actually anywhere other than in Configuration Manager, but they do exist out there. But definitely look at the docs when you're dealing, especially when you're dealing with specific parts of the product. You'll find lazy properties kind of trickled in here and there everywhere. So this is another example of lazy properties, actually showing if the assigned schedule is enabled or not. So I'm just going to flip through this quickly. This is basically a little bit of pain you have to go through to actually see if an assigned schedule is enabled. You can't just do that select statement or the where all in one line. You actually have to get all advertisements, and then you do a for each loop, and then in each one of those, then you do the WMI accelerator to get the entire object, and then you can see if the assigned schedule is enabled or not. And then display it or do whatever you want to with it. So just remember that anytime you're dealing with lazy properties, you have to use an accelerator or get instance to get the specifics for that object. This is very much the same thing. I just added, since you're running a function, you can go ahead and run that magical convert to date time to show pretty expiration times if you want. A couple more things with the PowerShell community extensions. There's just a couple more slides to talk about that. Basically, I wanted to show how this one should make your job a little bit easier. You see we're doing a get CM collection. If you specify the server, then it'll go to that server and determine the site code and run from there. Otherwise, you don't specify the server, it'll just assume locally. So this is how you can quickly get a specific collection back. Just a quick script for how to display the collection and information. And then a magical function at the end to delete all members from a collection. And we probably all found out the hard way once or twice, right? If you go into a collection and delete a member, you're not removing a rule, right? You're deleting a member. So that's what this does. So very handy if you've got a collection of obsolete and you don't want to wait on an obsolete task to run. But just keep that in mind. Another one that's kind of handy, especially in the 2007 world, right? In a multi-site hierarchy in 2007, you have to set a schedule up at the top for a collection, and any site below that will honor that schedule. We kind of cheated in our environment. We have some schedules set to some pretty lengthy times from the central site, but down at the lower child sites, we actually just have a task that runs in the background on a regular interval to just kick and update collection membership. Like I said, I'll bypass this demo. The information will be available in the slides, and as well as the text scripts that will be available for you also. So I want to talk a bit about client management, see some information there. So this is information that you can actually pull from the client side. And you can see there the namespaces are a little different, but the process is very similar. Again, since we're using getWMI you can add the dash computer on the end and actually query remote computers to get this information. It's helpful when you're troubleshooting. Just mentioning this PowerShell extension to grab the advertisement differently. And I do have an example here. Actually, that equal sign after computer name shouldn't be there. It's just dash computer name, space, and then the computer name. Just a quick way to look at inventory on a remote system. You can actually just run this command from any place that you have admin rights to remotely connect to that system, and it'll display the inventory information. It displays this lovely, you see the inventory action ID, which are the goods. If you've ever used send schedule, VBS, or something like that, you might be familiar with them. And then you can see the last time it was run and the last time it was reported. That's from the client side. So when you're troubleshooting inventory, that might be helpful. Just using the extension, we just basically converted all the dates and times so they're a little more user-friendly. Invoking client schedules, this is very similar to send schedule. By the way, in Config Manager 2012, I see they made an executable out of a send sched, but I think you still have to pass it to goods or something. So I would probably still prefer to use this because I can just say HWINV and I know it's going to kick a hardware inventory. Other things like forcing site reassignment, 2 lines of code basically, that's all you call. So again, you could run this on a remote system, just your WMI accelerator, the path would have to have the computer name of the remote system in it. Just setting an assigned site. Yeah, there's your remote client. If you want to see what the management point or proximate management point is for a system, you can run this as well. The SMS authority class is where you get the management point. It's a little harder to find proxy management point, but you can actually query that MP proxy information once you know it exists. So let's talk a little bit about client management. I'm going to show you a couple things that are new to Config Manager 2012 in here as well. Thank you, Angie. It's all this technology up here. Okay. I do have a lazy properties example. I'll go ahead and bypass that. If people have questions on that, we can come back to that. Let me show you these two. These are just a couple text files. See if I can make this a little bit larger. Just an example and not something you want to run in a production environment. Let me see if I can. Let's try 16. It's a little better. Okay. I'll scroll a little bit. Basically, querying your SMS packages to find where they're pointed to a certain source. And if they are, okay, change it, replace that source name with a different source name. Caution when you do this, because just like in the console, when you change a package source path in Config Manager 2007, you update DPs as soon as you do that. In your scenarios in migrating from 2007 to 2012, you might consider running something like this on your legacy packages in 2012, because when you actually change source path, Config Manager is going to look at that source, but it's going to see that it already has file hashes for all that content, and it won't have to redistribute stuff everywhere. So just a hot tip, if you're migrating from 2007 to 2012, obviously you got 2 different servers. If the source paths have to change, you may consider doing that after you get to 2012 so that you're not forcing an update of content everywhere. All right, let's do a couple client scripts. All right, so again, this is from the client. So when you're doing troubleshooting, this is pretty handy. You can actually get a little better view of what the client is seeing. I have something out on my IT forum called the Configuration Manager Client Troubleshooter. It actually uses VBScript and HTML applications to get this information right now, but it's pretty handy. And again, I'm just going to scroll through it so you can see it pretty quick. But you basically will see everything for that client for that deployment that client has, either optional or mandatory. Just an example, just by adding a computer name on the end, you're actually going to hit a remote computer if you want. In this case, it's the same computer, but you can add that. The example is just showing your inventory information, throwing it into a grid view so you can quickly see that information if you so choose. Again, you have to know your inventory action IDs, but you can get a little idea if things are actually running when they should. You know, for example, if you don't have software inventory enabled, you'll see a magical date, excuse me, of 1970. If it's anything other than that, then it's probably run at some point. All right, so here's some new magic. There's some interesting things under this new namespace, Root CCM Client SDK with Config Manager 2012 client. So I'm going to show you a couple things. This is also a very handy command line. Basically, it will show you all the methods for all the classes in that namespace. And once I run it, I'll show it, and hopefully it'll make a little more sense. And you can recurse with this as well, and I'll put an example on my blog. But I think this is pretty handy. I can see my classes, right? CCM application, that's the new application model. These are all methods, and you can see my namespace over here. But I actually have an install, an uninstall. I have a download contents. So it looks like the Config Manager 2012 client is pretty scriptable. It looks like I can do quite a bit with it. There's some interesting things. Is a window available now? So I think there's a lot of orchestration you could do from here if you wanted to. There were a couple things my friend Torsten brought up the other day under client user experience settings. He actually has a blog post, and I'll link it from my blog as well. In Config Manager 2012, the user has an option to set what is business hours, right? It's kind of like a user-defined maintenance window to allow updates to install after. Well, by default, it's like from 8 in the morning till 10 at night. There have been a couple requests from people. They want to change that to make the default something else. That's not available through the admin console or anything like that. If you wanted to, you could run a script to set whatever those defaults are that you want to be. Now, a user still has the ability to change those, but at least you can scope down what that initial default setting is if you want. So there's some pretty slick things in here, and like I said, the SDK doesn't have a lot of this information in it just yet, so over the next few weeks, hopefully we'll have a lot more there. You can see some information about software catalog as well, so that looks interesting. Evaluating policy. I even see something in here about evaluating, application policy. So that's been something that I've been pretty curious about, being able to just on demand evaluate those new app model applications. And we'll just show a couple of the settings here. You can see I'm in that client user experience settings, and you can see you can run a get business hours and set business hours. So that's how you do that. Again, Torsten documented how to do that. It's not in the SDK just yet. I'm sure it will be. Suppressing computer activity while in presentation mode. Those are all options that you'll see in Software Center. I'll just flip over here since I have it open. So you see those default work schedules and things like that are here. Computer maintenance. So it looks like you actually do have a way to customize those settings if you so choose. Keep in mind the idea of these settings, if you've enabled them for the user, is you want the user to be able to change them. But if you want to set some defaults, you can actually set some defaults now if you want. Just wanted to show the method for getting business hours. You can see there's nothing to it, just parentheses. And then some options for running programs. You can see basically from this class, I can tell it to execute a program. And if you saw the rest of the information, basically from other queries we ran, to get programs, show me the programs on the client. Now I can call a method to say execute this program on the client. Let's see, we'll go ahead and import the module. This is the PowerShell community extensions I mentioned. Let me just mention quickly, if you do download them, you just basically drop it in a modules folder in your user profile. There's a couple places you can put modules in PowerShell. This is the easiest one if you just want to run it for you. It's in your documents folder. Once you drop it in there, basically you just run import module and the name of the module. And then you can start getting this other information out of there. I think the big thing with this, like I said, is you can start to wrap around more things and perform those inside of one function. And like I said, I don't think I show it here, but there's help available for each one of these as well, just like a normal PowerShell commandlet. Just an example of triggering hardware inventory. This is the way you would do it, just natively. So basically, I'm running the trigger schedule method and telling it to run hardware inventory. Just a few lines of code. If you were going to put that into something else in a workflow, you could do that. And then just the example of wrapping it with a function. Like I said, those functions are available. I'll have a link for those. Let's see, advertisements. I think we're almost to the end of this one. I know you've seen a bit of that. Yes, okay, good. All right, let's flip back. Just one or two more slides. A couple other things to talk about, and then we'll be available for questions. All right, so preparing for Configuration Manager 2012. Just a couple things that I wanted to highlight on this. Like I said, we've been fortunate because we've been running it bleeding edge for a couple years now. I'm just going to talk about this. I put Donnie's blog. I put a link on there for his blog. He basically has a page that describes these things and the PowerShell commands we run to see this information. I think maybe not the icon notifications, but I'll talk about that one briefly because that one, for us, has been a pain. In 2007, you managed icon notifications for software updates separately than you do for everything else, right? So a lot of times at the site level, you would set the checkbox to say, hide that notification for when a new program is available, okay? In 2012, there's one setting that manages both software updates and available software. So for us, the challenge was, we want people to know when there's software updates available, but we want to make sure that if we just put something new in Software Center, they're not going to get a notification for it. That's how we roll. So we can't set this overall setting to say suppress now because then it hides software updates. All of our packages, programs that we migrated, we basically had to go through and enable the bit to suppress the end user notification for a new program is available. That is a default setting when you create a new program in Config Manager 2012, but anything you migrate will obviously have what you had before. We didn't care what it was set as in 2007 because we had the site-wide setting that said hide it. So that's something just to be aware of when you're migrating to 2012. And we have some scripts to basically show me all of my packages that are all my programs that are set to notify. And then we have a script to go ahead and check that checkbox wherever it isn't set. Unused packages, that's another great thing to clean up before you go to 2012. Donnie wrote in the script, basically he looks at the run another program first dependencies as well as task sequences, basically finds every package that's being used, compares that to every package, and gives you a list of packages that you should be able to remove from your environment. Just something to help you clean up before you start running the magical migration tools. Validating package source is another one. We still find this in our environment where we'll run a script, the script, and we'll find where someone deleted a source or renamed a source directory. When you do that, and then you run the migration tool from 2007 to 2012, you're going to have a failure. So just gives you a chance to be proactive in that. And then potential app model candidates. This is basically just telling you the easiest app model candidates, which are normally in MSI. So we kind of just go look through all your programs, find where you're calling MSIs, and then kind of list those out to you. So kind of gives you an idea of what you might consider, first getting over to application model. All right, I actually get to say this. There is a PowerShell provider coming for Configuration Manager. So hopefully somebody claps, because I've been waiting a couple years myself. Yes. So it is actually coming from Microsoft. Prior Group was working on it, and this is the information they said that we could share. So look for more information in the near future on that. The goal is that there will be commandlets for all administrative tasks that you can do in the console in Config Manager 2012. And they should be familiar enough to use for any admin to be able to leverage that in PowerShell as well. So this session next year would hopefully be leveraging all of that and then telling you how to extend those. So just keep that in mind and keep an eye on the SDK and the other tools that Microsoft is making available soon for Config Manager. Before we go to questions, I'll just show one or two more things. There's a couple, I guess I'll call them corner cases. I've got about 4 scripts or 4 commands that I'll run for you because a lot of people aren't familiar they exist. Switch screens. It's a bad day for this. Thank you. Okay, so in 2007, I used to do some stuff with exporting packages and programs into a MOF file. And you can, if you if you modify those MOF files right, you can actually compile those in other environments. So I have a sample VB script that basically you can run it against a test environment or a production environment and get a bunch of files that are MOFs, and then go compile those in a test environment to automatically transfer those packages, programs to another place. So this is an example to show the MOFs. Sherry, do you have a question now, or you want to wait till I'm done with this? Okay, great. All right, so you can see I did that get SMS advertisement, and I'm running all those same commands, but another built-in WMI command that's hard to find is this magical get text with MOF in quotes. So you can actually get the MOF information for that advertisement. So that's pretty handy for some people, not for a lot of people, but it was really hard for me to find in PowerShell, so I wanted to mention it. The other thing, if you're just looking for documentation purposes and things like that, you can also do a get text and put it into an XML. Obviously not very pretty here, but if you render it in Internet Explorer or something like that, you have all the information for that advertisement in an XML file now if you really want to do something with it. I don't think this one will run because there's multiple lines. We'll see it fail. Yeah. So let me just open that up in Notepad so I can show you real quick. There are often examples for how to go from a, let's see. Okay, yeah, so this is taking you from a WMI time and converting it to a standard time. And I thought I had the example in here to go the opposite way because that one's a hard one to find. But I'll go ahead and, like I said, I'll post that on my blog as well. Because sometimes you have to go the other direction. You have a friendly date and you need to put it into a WMI date. And then the last thing, just to show you how you can kind of extend things. This one, okay. So this is just an example. This is using one of the PowerShell IDE creators. Basically, it's very similar to like a Visual Studio experience. You can go in and create an IDE for anything, or create a GUI for PowerShell, and then you just wire it up like you do a Visual Basic application or something like that. So this is just an example that we use. Basically, you're connecting to the site. Then we query the provider to find all the collections that you have rights to. Remember, we are hitting the provider just like you would through the admin console. This environment isn't too exciting because it's just me and I have rights over everything. But, for example, our server team would only see server collections that we've given them rights to. But they can choose their collections from here, and then they can enter in systems, and it'll create a query-based membership rule for those systems. Does the magic, so if you have too many items, it'll make multiple rules and things like that. Also gives you the option to delete existing query rules if you want to completely remove everything from a collection and start over with what you're adding here. So it's kind of handy. Like I said, you don't even need to have the console open to do this. All you need is PowerShell, and you can write this type of GUI. I'll also make this available out on my forum and talk a little bit more about how I created it. But there's not a lot to it. Doesn't take a developer to do it. So hopefully that'll be something that maybe inspires you to take on new and interesting things as well. So let me hit the magical button to flip back. So I mentioned my blog here. I also wanted to mention my birds of a feather tonight. I'm very curious how you're using PowerShell with Configuration Manager. People have asked me that for years. Well, what do you want to see with PowerShell and Configuration Manager? You know, do people go through and create packages, programmed advertisements? Do most people just query? What types of things do you do? If you want, feel free to email me. If you can come to the Birds of a Feather, feel free to stop by there as well. Just trying to give some feedback, not just to me, but also to the product group at Microsoft to help people understand, or help them understand how we want to use PowerShell with Configuration Manager. So just keep that in mind, and I'll open it up for questions now. Sherry?
My question is, you had an example earlier about modifying the refresh schedule on a collection, like to differentiate perhaps one primary from another. Mm-hmm. Was that just for demonstration purposes, or was there a problem you were solving with that? I just couldn't think of why I would need to do that.
Well, actually, we built that out before we had fast collections in R3. So there are like 5 collections in our environment that we want to get software available to end users faster. And we couldn't tweak down the collection update on our central site to run every 10 minutes on those 5 collections. We started to feel some performance issues, so that's why we did that. So basically, we left it sitting 24 hours at the central site, and on all of the primaries, we basically had a task to run to update those 5 collections every 10 minutes.
Okay. So it's not as relevant in CM12 as it might have been in CM07
That's a good
pre-R3?
point. Right.
I'm just asking because I just couldn't think of it.
Yeah,
of a good,
yeah.
really reason for it.
With the fast collections, then yeah, you should be good. I mean, obviously, there's some limitations that are documented for how many you can have. So, or if you have specific workflows, maybe you don't want it to always run at a fast collection. But you know, if you're doing something where you're adding systems to a collection, well, in that case, it should update anyway. So, yeah, maybe you don't have many reasons anymore.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? No? Okay, I'll be available here, and like I said, birds of a feather, as well as the Q&A for speakers tonight. So thanks for your time. I appreciate it.